shots, 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 shots. Everybody!
Hey, good morning, guys. All right, whole topic today is how we beat the Nazis, how we beat Germany in World War II. And what ends up happening is the leaders of the Allies, the people on our side, decide that we got to beat Germany first. We'll go after Japan second. We'll fight them, but we'll conquer them second. So I want you to take a look at this map of Europe. And this map of Europe shows a lot of things in dark blue and in light blue. And it's kind of complicated, but really anything in blue is being controlled by Hitler and Nazis and Mussolini and stuff. So they've got almost all of Europe. One of the things Hitler screws up is his peace agreement with Stalin. And what Hitler does is attack Russian land. And I think it's his downfall to take a too big of a bite out of Europe. Anyway, he attacks Russia, and for a few years he's fairly successful. He's pushing in there and he's killing a lot of people. But the Russians do have what's called a counterattack. They start mobilizing their forces. They don't have the technology Hitler has, but they've got the soldiers and they've got the will, and they are able to turn Germany back and push them back toward their own country. Now it takes a while, and there's a lot of stories in there. The weather has a lot to do with it. The Russian holdout, the standouts in certain battles like Leningrad and Stalingrad and the battle for Moscow. So I'm going to have you take a look at, what's that called? Oversimplified. Oversimplified. And here's a little clip that kind of shows the whole Russian thing that's going on.
Hey, Soviet Union, look out. With 3 million troops, Hitler launched the largest ground invasion in history, and Stalin was far from ready. Both Churchill and Roosevelt had warned him of an impending attack, but he dug his head in the sand, and the Soviets didn't stand a chance. Germany made staggering progress, with huge encircling movements capturing mind-boggling numbers of Russian troops. 250,000 at Bialystok, Minsk, 300,000 at Smolensk, nearly 700,000 at Kiev, and again at Vyazma and Bryansk. Leningrad was put under a siege that would last an insufferable 4 years. The invasion of Russia had been Hitler's main ideological goal from the beginning, and his hatred for the ethnic peoples there was now unleashed in all its fury. The Eastern Front of the Second World War was brutal for all that endured it. The Germans were now inside of Moscow, and that's it. It's all over. But then it happened. It got cold. Stupid cold. Hitler had hoped the Soviets would give up before winter, but they kept fighting. His commanders came to him and said, "Can we please dig in for the winter and wait until spring?" "No. Keep going." "But oil is literally freezing inside our vehicles." "That's fine. Keep going." "We're having to leave the corpses of our frozen horses by the side of the road so we can still find our way in the snowdrift." "Perfectly normal. Keep going." Hitler hadn't given his millions of men winter clothing and supplies because he thought he really should have won by now. Then, Stalin called in troops from the Siberian front, specially trained to fight in the extreme cold, and the Germans were no match. They were now being pushed back. They had no choice but to dig in and wait for winter to end. Winter was over, and Hitler could continue his push eastward. But this time, he switched up his strategy. He wanted to focus on the south. His plan was to cut off the Russian armies in the Caucasus, an area full of oil, and then invade the Caucasus and take all the oil. His forces moved across the north with ease, and Hitler got cocky. He rerouted the 4th Panzer Army south early, leaving the 6th Army to complete the encircling movement alone. To do so, the 6th Army had to reach and take the key Soviet city of Stalingrad. The Russians defended it fiercely, and Stalingrad saw some of the harshest fighting of the entire war. The Soviets held up the German advance for 5 months as they battled in the war-torn city, which bought them valuable time. When the Germans had first launched their invasion a year earlier, the Soviets had moved their factories to the east. Those factories had been building a butt-ton of tanks and aircraft and getting the Soviet army up to scratch. Now, it was ready. Stalin gathered his new and improved forces around the city, and in an attack that resembled Hitler's own encirclement tactics, they began surrounding the 6th Army. Hitler's commanders came to him and said, "Hey, maybe we should retreat." But Hitler said, "No, you stay." The entire 6th Army was trapped and had to surrender. With complete air superiority, the Soviets started pushing westward. For Stalin, it was a resounding victory. For Hitler, an absolute catastrophe.
Okay. So here we are, and this slide says, so how do we beat Hitler and Mussolini? Well, we've already talked about the Russians, and they're pushing back. The second element of this is bombing. hundreds and hundreds of these gigantic bombers take off from England and fly over German cities and start dropping bombs on them. It's a crazy mission for Americans and British in those planes. They're getting shot at and shot down, but they swarm in like a swarm of bees and drop a whole bunch of bombs and then leave. I'll show you a clip from a movie just as how intense this is, flying over German cities and having to drop bombs while you're getting shot at, and then we'll come back to another element. Okay, this is pretty intense. All right.
Captain! We lost cover to our side! Extinguishers! Extinguishers! Shut it down! Feather prop 2! Lost oil pressure! She's not shutting down! Is everyone okay? We made it! Not yet. Bandits! 12 o'clock! Someone get to the top turret, now! Motion to your wingman. Get them in as tight as they can. Here they come!
Now, the U.S. brings soldiers into this war, and we actually land in Africa. And if you can see that purplish down there, we land in northern Africa. It's a lot of desert stuff, and with tanks and with all sorts of infantry troops, we start pushing across the deserts of Africa. Now, Hitler's got guys down there. The British are helping, coming from the other side, but what we do is we go through Africa, and then we make the leap over to Italy. It was called Operation Torch. Anyway, we do that, and it does take a while. We want to get Germany from below, all right? And although it takes a while, we are able to get to Italy. Italy flips. They actually support us and get rid of Mussolini. But Churchill, the leader of the British, called the Italian invasion going after Hitler's soft underbelly, like getting him from below. So this is like really like the third element here is coming from below.
Churchill still wanted to attack from the south, while the Americans preferred a full sea invasion in northern France. All right, said the Americans, we'll do it your way. Allied forces successfully landed in Sicily and began moving north. They also carried out bombing raids over Rome. The thing was, many of the people in Sicily had relatives living in America, and they greeted the American troops quite warmly. With the war reaching home territory, most Italians just weren't that into it, and Mussolini was suddenly very unpopular. He was voted out by his own fascist Grand Council and was toppled from power. Italy immediately began negotiations for surrender. Hitler wasn't surprised and had already sent reinforcements southward. In an operation he ironically called Operation Axis, German troops quickly disarmed Italian troops in the north. The Allies continued fighting the Germans up through Italy, but then winter set in, meaning mud, and everything slowed to a halt. All right, said the Americans, let's do it our way as well.
Okay, so we've got what I like to call sort of like the Hitler sandwich. They're coming in from this way, we're coming in from the bottom, we're bombing from the top. We need to open one more side. Now take a look at that maroon where I've put an invasion of France. This is the final piece of the puzzle to get Hitler. We got to box him in, and we plan an amphibious invasion from England. Boats with tons and tons of guys and tanks and all sorts of stuff. We're going to do beach landings. We're going to fly over France because remember, the Germans have conquered France. It's kind of part of the German Empire. And we're going to drop parachute guys and gliders. We're going to hit the beaches. It's going to be an enormous attack. You may have heard of this before. It's known as D-Day or the Normandy invasion. Now, officially, it was called Operation Overlord. We'll talk more about it tomorrow, but I just want you to know what they were up against. Hitler had his generals and all of his soldiers that were on that side of the country occupying those areas build what he called the Atlantic Wall, a whole bunch of defenses on the beaches and anywhere where the water met the land. and they did a huge construction project making obstacles very, very difficult for a landing. The generals and Hitler knew that there would probably be some sort of attack on that part of the front. So what you're seeing here is a whole bunch of pictures of construction going on. Now take a look at this cutaway. It shows the obstacles on the beaches, and they're all labeled. On the top of the cliffs, all the way to the right side, are concrete bunkers. Soldiers are living there on the beaches with these gigantic guns. They can blow boats out of the water. Barbed wire and all sorts of obstacles. You can see a dotted line that talks about the tide, high and low tide. A lot of these obstacles would be underwater, most likely during an attack, and they would rip out the bottoms of boats, and there were mines on some of them. When the soldiers landed, there'd be all sorts of obstacles. So they would have to land guys there first and blow up the obstacles, and then put boats on there that would have tanks and heavier equipment. It's known as D-Day, Operation Overlord, and we'll focus on it tomorrow because it's the largest amphibian attack, land and sea, in human history. It's enormous, and it's something that gets celebrated every June 6th. It's the anniversary of D-Day. So I hope with the oversimplified and my maps and charts, you kind of get an idea of this Hitler sandwich, okay? Pushing them from all sides and slowly weakening the Germans. It is good to know that, we did team up with the Russians. There's a saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And even though we didn't like Stalin because he's a terrible dictator, we needed him to beat Hitler, and he needed us too. Okay, so no homework tonight. Finish up the stuff from Japanese internment, and I'll be back tomorrow with D-Day. All right, bye guys.